Hi everyone, welcome to another episode of the Pondering Mage. So yeah, this looks like this has turned into a series, although it'll be a sort of sometime series. And I might end up doing that thing that I currently do with other series where I sort of intermingle them in the release schedule, where I sort of do 3 of one and then 1 of the other. So I'll probably be doing 3, or roughly 3 Tiny Experiments videos and then 1 Pondering Mage videos. Now the purpose of these Pondering Mage videos in some ways to show you what goes on behind the curtain in terms of me coming up with ideas for tiny experiments beyond me just listening to a podcast. And as I've said in the original Pondering Mage episode, like the pilot episode, if you want to think about it that way, most of this stuff that I do comes out of a sort of early morning flourishing habit. And so I thought it'd be interesting to look at another one for a particular particular thing that I came up with during the week. So the last one I did as an example when I was talking about my sort of flourishing pondering habit, it was a walkthrough of something that I'd done that morning. This one is a walkthrough of a previous one that I'd done. What I tend to do is I keep these for a while, and then once I've grabbed the idea in its nutshell, I actually delete these because I have no use for the process really. And then what sometimes happens is sometimes I turn the process itself into a application. So sometimes it's the result of the process inspires a particular set of tiny experiments, and sometimes it's the process itself that does that. In this case, it was the result of the process that inspired a potential tiny experiment. I don't know if I end up doing this one because it's incredibly niche, and I ended up learning more through the sort of other things that it opens up and the ideas that it came up with that I could then use to experiment with features in Python than it did the actual finished application. So in some ways there's a third outgrowing here. So it's either ideas I get from the process itself, ideas I get from the sort of end product of the process, or ideas that come about as a side effect, or a side effect, or even a code smell of the process. So it's interesting once you start to do this. So we're using Copilot to do this. Now the nice thing with this is to just do these and play around with ideas. That's all you need. If you've got no intention of sort of actually running any final code, you don't need an IDE or anything. Because sometimes I'll just do these as almost like edutainment, where I'm sort of looking for inspiration later on down the line and actually never use the final code. So there's lots of different ways of I suppose what I'm saying, long story short, there's lots of different ways of using this, but this is quite a nice thing to play around with because you can do it all online. As long as you have some sort of account you can use as a Microsoft account, you can then, go into Copilot, log in and knock yourself out. It's particularly interesting at the moment because of all the extra bells and whistles that have been integrated into Copilot as a result of all the developments at OpenAI. And when I do these, I leverage those in different amounts. So my recipe, if you like, varies from session to session. As I've said, I will include all the prompts listed in the description, so you could repeat this in any on any online service that allows you to use LLMs to do Gen AI, however you want to think about it. And I'm using the free one here, so it's not costing me anything beyond my time. The other thing I will say is you can get away without it, but this works best, I think, if you have some service that offers a deep research option, because I always tend to start off with a deep research when I'm doing these. And the question that I sort of was thinking in the back of my head was that we've seen a lot of advances in, recent 6 months even, in terms of what advice is given if you want to play around with the performance of a model and you don't have the resources to retrain an existing model or to fine tune it in some way. So really, what's open to you beyond that, and the usual rabbit holes you go down, and I've done videos on this, is you play around with the prompt, you play around with the system instructions, you play around with the settings like temperature top P or top K. Now, my understanding is the current perceived wisdom beyond any system instructions or settings you might do, and system instructions sort of sometimes can fold into context engineering, but my understanding of it is context engineering, a lot of it is around what goes in and provides context to the prompt and the way you can do that. So you might have additions to the prompt beyond the actual instruction that give the prompt either more context or provide better context for the output format. And as we go through this, you'll sort of see the stuff that might potentially come up. But what this was about is saying, well, let's put all of those things that we know to work in various ways to one side. Okay, in terms of changing or improving or tweaking the performance of the model. So put system instructions, put context engineering, put altering settings to one side, and what are you left with in terms of novel approaches? So I basically asked that question and set the drop down to do deep research. And if you've ever done deep research on this model and it's similar on other models, you will get a report which you can download, and the report's pretty extensive. Now at some point I would want to, and what I usually do is save the report, so I can revise that later, even after I've sort of deleted the conversation. And you can see it goes on and on and on about different strategies, and you can sort of read through this and get a feel for it. But really what I was using it for is this trick I've talked about before, is creating a sort of, creating context, I suppose, in which to work, in which to explore. So I'm using this report to create context within me just using using an LLM to get me answers about the sort of things that don't use context or don't lean necessarily into context. Now, that's not to say some ideas that it comes up with won't be context adjacent in some way. So let's just export that. I normally just export that as a PDF. There we go. Right. Of the ideas discussed in this report, which can be experimented with easily in Python using requests and the Gemini API. So of the ideas, looks like I missed a bit here. So yeah, I obviously didn't finish off what I was thinking there, but it got what I was trying to say, which is always interesting. And there's a few typos here. In terms of, I sort of started typing and pressed enter before I'd actually checked what I was asking. I suppose, yeah, it was of the ideas discussed in this report, should have been a comma there, which can be experimented with easily in Python using requests and the Gemini API with Gemini 2.4 Flash. probably should have said which of these, but anyway, it gave the appropriate result, or what I was after. So it talked about prompt chaining, self-refinement loops, multi-perspective prompting, contextual memory emulation, prompt compression and expansion, and the basic structure of the request tool. So I'm sort of setting up this rather limited set of resources. So I'm saying, yep, we're using Python, we're using requests, we're not going to use the Gemini library in Python. And the reason why I often do that is because at some point I may want to move into a different language, and I don't want to lean too heavily into Python libraries, in case that library there won't always be an equivalent, it's going to be different, sorts of things like that. So I tend to like to use the request library because it's closest to me to if I was doing some sort of curl request, really. You know, I can still see the basic JSON structure. It's not being too, what's the word I'm looking for? It's not being abstracted away too much from a basic curl request. And like I said, I find that really useful if I'm refactoring to other languages. Now, I could start off by just doing this all in one, in whatever language I'm going to write it in. But the reason why I do this is when I'm doing this sort of experimental work and looking for ideas, I like to use Python because I can read the code a lot faster and see where it's sort of making obvious mistakes. That's basically why I do it. And I would sort of recommend doing that, actually, if you're doing this sort of weird brainstorm coding, do it in a language that you're familiar with, because then it's easier to spot when it's making mistakes. So do it in a language where you really know how the syntax lays out and the paradigms and the idioms and all that sort of thing, so you can easily sort of spot the data shapes and sort of stuff. Okay, so it sort of gave me a rough outline. It's holding back a bit. And remember, now we've switched into just a simpler mode. We've switched into quick response. So we started off with deep research, and I then went to quick response. I could have gone into this Smart GPT-5, which I've been using a lot recently, but I wanted to just get some quick responses, just see what it would come up with before we really start coding things up. So then I ask another question: can you come up with experiments with each, and in some case multiple experiments, to make 10 experiments, please? And again, I made a typo here. That should say, please create a single runnable Python script. It's got cheat, but again, it's pretty robust, these models, about you know, as long as you don't make too many mistakes that can completely change the context, then yeah, it has sort of understood what I was trying to do here. Nice thing about doing these episodes is you get to see this warts and all. I decided with these not to. I could have rerun all of this with everything cleaned up, but I thought, no, let's just do it show it as it really happens in real life. 10 experiments with Gemini Flash. So there we've got the experiments and one Python script to run them all. So pretty straightforward. So I looked at this and thought, well, a lot of this I've done already. A lot of these in previous episodes. So let's see where this takes me if I say, okay, what are some advanced techniques for API interaction? So it goes on, walks me through a lot of the usual suspects. And then I said, okay, just folding it back, how do these tie into the sections in the original report. And so what it's done is create this table to map techniques to report sections. Now the only problem at this point, because I haven't been super specific, it's sort of deviated a little bit from its original task in some ways, is that the mixture's getting muddled a little bit because I'm not keeping it closely on the rails of, the original thrust of the report. I'm referencing the report, but it's deviated a little bit because I wasn't very specific here. So I should have been a little bit more specific, but that turned out fine in the end. I did a bit of a course correction. So then I asked it to come up with some advanced API to create a single Python script. So one script, many techniques. At this point I haven't run any of this. Okay, I'm just basically spitballing different ideas, just seeing where it takes me, looking at the code, seeing what starts to come up, seeing how it's laying it out. So it's got all its little, functions for each of these things it's going to ask Gemini using the Ask Gemini API call. So I haven't validated any of this yet. And as I've said in probably other adjacent episodes to this, often to basically make it a little bit more, to basically keep it on the straight and narrow, I'll often feed in my sort of base API call script, so I don't run into the usual problem of it getting a bit confused about search basing and how to handle thinking text that's come back through JSON and things like that, where often it'll fall over. Okay, so then I thought, well, I want to try and steer it away from doing anything agentic. So I then said, what are some other non-agentic unique techniques usable within the confines of Python requests and Gemini API? And so it did this normal sort of ingratiating thing. I love how you're doing this, or isn't that a great idea? Yeah, that's still there. I love how you're pushing the boundaries here. You're asking, what can we do with just Python requests and the Gemini API without building full-blown agents or orchestration frameworks? That's a creative constraint, and it opens up a playground of non-agentic, prompt-driven techniques that still feel powerful and clever. So we get a number of non-agentic techniques: prompt mutation, semantic prompt blending, prompt reversal, contrastive prompting, prompt injection, simulation, temporal prompting, prompt as a data generation, prompt-driven evaluation, prompt logging with variation, and prompt-driven simulation. So this piqued my interest because we started to get some interesting ones there. So he said, do you want to try these in code? So I said, show me this in code. Show me the code. Non-agentic prompt techniques. So then I really started to push it a little bit further. So I'm thinking, well, I really need to get into the area of contrarian approaches. Like, this is where I'm going with this. I'm saying, well, I'm aware of all these techniques, but I'm after something a little bit different. And okay, I'm doing this in a very roundabout way, whereas I could be a bit more precise. But of course, I'm brainstorming here, so I didn't really know what my final goal was when I started this process. I just thought, well, let's explore some experiments that aren't going down the usual, prompt, system instruction, temperature shenanigans, basically. So let's create another set of experiments that explore possible contrarian approaches within the confines of our imposed development environment or repeating any previous experiments. It calls it a deliciously rebellious prompt. You're asking, what are the clever contrarian ways to stretch the Gemini API in Python without stepping into generic agentic territory or repeating ourselves? Let's lean into the creative tension and build a new set of 10 experimental techniques that challenge assumptions, flip defaults, or subvert expectations, all within our sandbox. So notice again, well, you wouldn't know, but I've not actually tested anything yet. This is all hypothetical. So this could all be super buggy. So contrarian prompt experiments round 2, fresh batch. There we go. So you can see it's sort of just, you know, creating new functions, but still basically working along the same, you know, as this this particular prompt, which I believe we find out in a moment is, I don't know if this point, but at some point, it could be early on, it could be now, because I've not tested anything, is flawed in some way. And then we get a, like, you know, why these experiments matter, which is great. And that now has stopped. So that's interesting because there was more here. Let me just refresh this in case it's missing a bit. Oh, here we go, yeah. It's alright, I was looking at this earlier. I've been doing, this is one thing you have to be careful when you're logging in on different machines, and I started, then shot a video and then finished this off a little bit later. So let me find the point at which I updated this. Oh, here we go, yeah. There we go. Oh, why these matter, that's it. There we go. Contrarian prompt experiments round 2. There we go. See, always refresh if you're working on different machines. So yeah, we're looking at this on my PC. Quite a lot of this, if not all of it, actually was done on my iPad, but I forgot to refresh this between me working on the iPad originally and then going back and carry on working on it after I'd done something else. So often the other thing is with this pondering, sometimes it'll happen over several hours. So I might start it as my initial flourishing habit, and then I might have breakfast or go for a walk or whatever, and then come back and think, yeah, I need to ask this question of it. So sometimes it's nice to have a gap between. So why this matters. So then it sort of starts tempting me by saying, do you want to build a dashboard that lets you toggle between contrarian, creative and structured modes? I'm game. So okay. So build the dashboard and also modify the code to pull the key from the Gemini API key environment variable. Because I think I noticed at some point it wasn't doing that. It was encouraging me to hard code it, which, don't do that. Absolutely, RJ. Here's a clear interactive Python dashboard built with Kinter, which is something I've not used. So that got me really interested. So, okay, we've got a dashboard library here, which could be cool. So let me actually, while we're looking at this, I've closed that accidentally. Okay, let's do that. Yeah, so we have this, and at this point it says, do you want to add some tabs? Again, I've not run any of this now. I'm just relying on what it's told me it does, which is not the best thing in the world to do. But, it's basically how I like to brainstorm to a certain degree and just see where the mood takes me. So API key, so it's done the bit I wanted and it's done the other thing it said it was going to do. Then it tempts me with some tabs. So yep, add those in. That'll be good. So we have a tabbed edition. What's new? And do you want to add a custom prompt, and do you want to do some stuff between toggling between 1.5 and 2.5 Flash? I didn't want to do that because I'm getting usage issues with 1.5 Gemini. So yeah. And also, if I wanted to introduce Google grounding, there's a different mechanism, I think, if my memory serves me correctly, you have to use to do it with Gemini 1.5. Now, I could create the code so it dispatches the different ways of doing that, if it does it at all. That's the problem. I can't remember even if it does it, but I think there is a sort of bolt-on or a slightly different way of doing it, which allows you to add search base to Gemini, but I can never remember if it's search base or thinking. Anyway, it's beside the point, because I didn't want to have it toggling between different models at this point. I just want the custom prompt idea. So it just allows me to type in my own contrarian idea and run them. It's always handy to have when you're doing testing, I think, just to have a prompt. To be able to just run any prompt. So we got our custom prompt being added, but at this point I was I was definitely well beyond my understanding of this library, because I'd not used it before. So I just needed a little bit of clarification about how should this be laid out, because what you tend to find with these sessions is it's trying to be as what's the word I'm looking for, like low resource using as possible. So it doesn't do often like it used to do when I first started playing around with these models, is it doesn't just keep spitting the code out again and again and again. It might say, oh, here's the bit you want, just add it to your code. So it's like, okay. And sometimes it will give a point where it say, current code starts here, here's a function from the original one, and your code goes in here, replaces a function or whatever. And so I said, well, where does this code go specifically? Great question. To integrate it into your Gemini dashboard, you'll want to insert the code in a very specific spot. Here's exactly where and how to do it. So it was saying sort of, do it just before the loop. Stick it in there. So I'm saying, so I thought, well, there's a bonus tip. Can you provide a complete version of the script? So there we go. There's the there it is, all in there with the appropriate code in situ with how to use it. So then I actually bothered to run the code. Now this runs fine now, but it didn't. And when I tried to run it, and I sort of suspected this would happen, it failed. It was doing some re-requesting shenanigans in the original script at this point here. Retries. But when I looked at it, I had question marks over the construction of the actual attempt itself. And also the fact that this was, not a great try except clause. And so it wasn't really giving me much information. So what I needed to do was basically refactor. So first of all, I just ran it past it, and it was sort of just saying, oh, well, try these things. Could be a missing key. Well, I knew the key wasn't incorrect. Firewall issues, unlikely to have exceeded my limit or quota, pretty much. Then there's a sort of quick test I could do. And so what I then decided to do was actually refactor outside of this and end up with this, which does work. And I'll show you what the finished thing looks like in a moment. well, not the finished thing, but what end. So I just did this. I wasn't very, I should have been more expressive. I just said, can you update the following function, and gave it that, hoping that it would go, oh yeah, I need to update the function with this. But you know, that wasn't great wording on my part. So it actually did exactly what it surmised I told it, and just took the function and actually updated the function I'd given it to be in its mind better, which I didn't really want it to do. So then I said, sorry, I didn't explain this very well. Can you just swap out the original function with this version? Okay, got it. There's a no frills version, just a clean swap. And did it just requoted the function. So it's like, okay, can you show the complete code? So then there's a complete code. So I'm finding that, yeah, I definitely got to be better at doing this than I've got into bad habits. I've got into bad habits because it was really weird when I first started doing this sort of stuff. It was really quite creepy in that you could almost read your mind, and you could be artfully vague and it still managed to get things right. So yeah, can you put it in? It's still not wanting to integrate it. So somewhere I've lost the context here. I think I've been going on too long here, and contextually it's only probably focusing on part of what I've discussed before. So then what I did was I just said, oh, please integrate this into this, and re-gave it its original code that didn't work. And then from that, I've got basically what I wanted. So part of this is me being too vague, and part of it is just, this particular, the quick response one, being sort of really sort of holding back a little bit, and then also the context. No doubt you might get different results if you use, say, this or think deeper. But I decided I just wanted to use the quick response beyond the deep research I did for the first one. And you can see I stopped at this point because once I double checked those changes, so I did actually manually do it myself, and then ran it before I asked it to actually integrate. So that's why there's two here. There's the one I did where I just went into the code and then swapped out manually this with this, and then a version which is it doing it for me. So I don't even know, I haven't checked to see if there's any difference between the two, probably not. But I kept both just to satisfy your curiosity. So let's just see what this runs like with the fixed API call after all of this. So this will be beyond that time I ran it with the API call, which was not right. So this was only about the second or third time I'd run actually any code. So I wouldn't recommend doing that if you're in a hurry, but it's fun to do if you're just pondering. And I sometimes like to do these as, I think I said, edutainment, where I'll sit there with my iPad and a bit of downtime and just poke a few ideas around. And I could probably go online somewhere like to Replit or somewhere like that and actually run the code, but I just decided to just see where it takes me. So this was cool because I'd not used this particular tool before, this library, to create this dashboard. So we now have, let's just see if this works. It did work earlier on my laptop, but this is the first time I've run it down here. So we'll see if we run into any issues. So my classic one is, what are your capabilities? And then we'll do run custom prompt. Probably would want to add a bit more feedback to this because it's doing that thing where you sort of press it and you don't know what it's done. So yeah, definitely feedback is good. So there we go, running a custom prompt. Now one thing it doesn't do is it doesn't tell you what's going on under the bonnet, but of course if you've written the code yourself or created any code, then yeah, you can see that. Now I'm not going to put any of this stuff up on my GitHub page because really the part of this that I'm interested in, and a part of that I'd love people to experiment with is the actual prompt, the original prompts up until I started to sort of hand code this or hand change it. So I'm going to include those in the description. But I just wanted to do a quick sort of test here to make sure, yep. So we're going to do reverse emotion. So of course all of these are locked in, all of the prompts are actually hard coded apart from the custom prompt. So we're doing a reverse emotion prompt. And again, you could look at the code in here, go to the appropriate experimental part here and see what it's doing. So the actual code's pretty short. There's not a lot going on here, but it's just messing with the the prompting in interesting ways. So it is really, you know, messing with the context. Yeah. And we get onto structured, and there's some options there. My favourite, intentionally vague. Yeah, definitely need some feedback here. Also the buttons. Oh, I see why. No, that is right. Self-negating prompt. What's that? Explain why this prompt should not be answered. That's funny. Yeah, so I had no idea what it was, apart from as it was going along. I mean, it was just, this is an interesting meta-level prompt. Oh. Okay. But anyway, the idea is that obviously you would want to go in and whatever comes out when you run these prompts through, like I said, starting out with a report and then sort of picking apart everything. Yeah, I'll be curious. Now, one thing I will do actually to make it a little bit different, the only difference I will do, so full transparency here, is I will correct some of my stupid typos, but I won't create the intentional vagueness. So there was a couple of here examples where probably adding a comma in would help, and certainly saying something rather than whatever it was to do with cheat would also probably be a bit better. So yeah. Anyway, hopefully you've enjoyed that other this other Pondering Mage episode. Just again to give you some idea how my mind works or doesn't, depending on how you look at it. So thanks once again for watching. Bye for now, and I will catch you in a future episode.